friends, welcome back to the Garden Next Door. Today we're talking about one of the biggest mistakes that we made when building our garden and that so many other gardeners make as well, and that is building raised garden beds out of Douglas fir. At first, it might seem like a really budget-friendly option when building raised garden beds, and it looks beautiful. We built ours out of Douglas fir, and although it did take a lot of time, effort, and was a high cost, they're beautiful. But the ramifications are now here, and we're going to talk exactly why I do not suggest building raised garden beds out of Douglas fir. We'll talk around some other options and alternatives that you can be doing instead, and why we're actually moving into the no-till method in a large section of our garden. Let's dig into Douglas fir wood. Douglas fir wood is a soft wood, and oftentimes it can be a cheaper option when looking for wood to build your garden beds out of. Now, there are so many different types, and we will talk about some better alternatives that I definitely think if I were to do it again with raised garden beds made out of wood, I would choose, as well as some other different alternative options. But when doing Douglas fir, you do need to make sure that you're doing something because it is very prone to rot. As you can see here, this bed is crazy rotted. It's just breaking up in my hand. Now, when we originally made our beds, we did use the Shishibang method, which is basically just lighting it on fire. And one thing that we did is we definitely didn't use it as extreme, so you really want it to be completely charred. And our first mistake was that we didn't completely char it because it was just taking so long. We had so many beds. We have a really large garden footprint, and we have a lot of beds that we wanted to make them out of. So we definitely skimped out on that, was our first mistake. Now, once we actually built the garden, we did notice that every year we really did need to do something to keep the wood going longer. We've had this bed since probably 3, maybe 4 years going on it, and we've already had some beds that we had to remove because they were just so bad. And you're gonna find that Douglas fir raised beds are gonna last you around 3 to 5 years depending on the climate that your area is in. And if you have a much wetter climate, it might not even last that long. We've also found that depending on the wood, so obviously we have 2-foot high beds, which means that we have 2 stacked 12-inch long boards, and the bottom boards were they're trashed. On the inside, this is what the inside of the boards really looked like. They were just disintegrating. I'm not even touching that hard. And one is from water damage, just the water sitting inside the beds. The dirt was right up against it. And then there's also a lot of animal damage. We've had termites, we've had carpenter bees, crazy amounts of bugs in these. So something else to really watch out for when you have this. And we found that the beds were actually attracting even more bugs. So it has been a crazy, awful scenario. You can see just so many things eating at this wood. We originally used Douglas fir because we thought that it would be a more cost-effective method for building out wooden raised beds. We were looking at things like cedar and hardwoods, and Douglas fir just seems like a more economical way of doing things. But we have probably spent over $10,000 in our garden building everything out, and so much elbow grease and time to make these beds and then stain them, to upkeep them with organic materials, and just the general upkeep of them has cost us so much time and effort that I would never do it again. Raised garden beds are an amazing way to plant, and there are many benefits to it, but I definitely wouldn't choose Douglas fir. So let's talk about some of the alternative methods that you could be doing. If you love the wood look, I suggest using cedar or a redwood. These are going to be a higher cost wood for your initial cost, but they're said to last for around 10 to 20 years. So they might cost a little more upfront, but when you're creating your beds and purchasing in them, you're not going to have to worry about the upkeep as often, and that is a win in my book. Another option, which we've done a lot in container gardening, is actually using steel or metal raised garden beds. Now, we've used things like feeding troughs. Now, actually, a lot of the big box stores will get these in, and they're pretty good price. I found that in the fall time period, you can even get discounts on these, and a lot of feed stores will also keep these, and you can repurpose them. They're gonna last a lot longer, and it's gonna have a lot cleaner look, especially if you do have termites or wood-eating bugs. This is a great alternative. Although there are some downfalls. In one, it has a completely different look than wood, as you can tell. And two, depending on your area, it doesn't retain the heat as well. So in the summer, it's going to be a magnet for heat, but in the winter, the heat is just going to leak out. Especially over the past couple of years, there's been so many different looks and feels that you can get for metal raised beds. Something like this one that is a different color. I will link down some of my favorites down below because we do have them a lot in our garden. But these are a really great alternative. They're super easy to set up. You don't need any tools except for maybe a wrench, and you don't even need that much wrench, screwdriver. Most of the time it comes with it, so you don't need that much carpentry skill, and then you can fill them up. They're very modular, so oftentimes they'll come where they can shape them in different forms and shapes, so you can really get pretty creative with what they look like in your garden, although they might be a little bit higher price than, say, in-ground gardening. Another really great option is concrete blocks or bricks. They're a permanent structure, they're not gonna rot, so you only really need to build it once, but you need to make sure that where you're putting it is probably where you want it, because they're gonna be pretty heavy. They're gonna absorb radiant heat, which is good for peppers and tomatoes, but the downside is it's not gonna be a flexible area. If you do want to change the shape of your garden or move it, it's gonna be really hard to do. The last option for a raised bed is something where you can be using reclaimed materials, think wood or rocks, and building your own. This is more of the homestead approach, and it's usually the cheapest because you're just taking things from around your property, maybe looking on Facebook Marketplace, asking friends, and you're building it your own. The downside is it might be a little more rustic looking, but maybe that's exactly what you want. And if you're getting started with gardening, this can be a really great option because it is really low cost. And then as you learn to garden, you can start to scale up into the more higher priced options. Because when we were pricing out replacing our beds with cedar or a hardwood, we were looking at over $10,000 in just the wood. And then you have to add on our manual labor time, which time is money, and any screws or building materials that you might additionally need. Once our garden beds started to deteriorate, we knew that we needed a new option, and we started to get pricing and do research on all of the different options. And we decided to actually put all of our beds in ground moving forward. Now, there are definitely a lot of pros and cons to in-ground gardening, but the pros just outweighed all of the cons. One of the biggest cons for us is that we have to do everything really low. So the ability to have things in a raised bed is just for mobility and ease. But when we came to think about it, we're still in our 30s and we can get down on our knees. We have a family, we have kids, and being able to just get in the dirt is maybe probably the best part of gardening. So we're going to just suck it up, and then maybe when we're older, invest in more, because building in the ground is the cheapest, most inexpensive option, and you have so much flexibility. First off, we do not have great water pressure from our house, and we're going to be collecting all of our water for our garden. We have been doing this, and we need to make a system that is just a drip system. Given we are going to be using a gravity system, in-ground meant that we don't have to work as hard to raise our watering systems. So they'll be at the end in some concrete blocks, and then we'll feed them down our lines. We ended up making our own garden beds out of organic materials. I'm going to be doing another video on how we're actually building all of these out. But the benefits of being in-ground is that you can actually use all the benefits of your ground in your beds. So all the microbes, the bugs, the worms can all come up from our ground, and you don't have to worry about amending all of this soil and having really great soil from the get-go in a raised garden bed, because you can really use some of that in the ground. If you don't have great ground soil, you can also amend that as well. We also really want to do no-till gardening. So we're going to be using a lot of the organic materials that we can find around us and from our community, which means things like mulch, logs, and some recycled materials like cardboard, leaves, and compost from our chickens and garden materials, kitchen scraps, everything like that. So this is just going to be something that works a lot better with us, and we think it's going to be teaching us a lot more about the garden and really get into the dirt, get down in there. We've been doing a lot of research over the past couple of months on the no-till method, and there are just so many more benefits, and it's building up an amazing year-over-year growth in our garden. The no-till method means that you're not really tilling the ground, which can actually be quite harmful. Instead, what we're doing is we're using a lot of organic materials to build on top of the soil, which is going to be really beneficial to the whole microbes of our soil, to the worms, the fungi, the animals in there. And year over year, we're going to actually be adding things to our ground, so it's going to be turning more into a sponge, meaning a lot of the water is going to be retained in there. We're not going to have to weed as often, and we're really just building out this garden for the future of ourselves. So a lot more work is going to be needed at the beginning now as we really build out this garden area, but the more that we build into it, the more we create this into a real food forest and not so much a raised garden bed for the aesthetical appeal, the more we're going to get out of our garden. And I think we're going to work more with our garden than against it. That doesn't mean that a raised garden bed setup is bad, because we are going to keep a lot of our raised garden beds. We're just going to do a little bit different of a design, and we'll be going over in the next couple of weeks on the channel what exactly everything's going to look like. But their benefits are still pretty great. First off, it's going to keep a nice tidy look. I think it looks really beautiful having a raised garden beds. It's great for urban gardening because you're able to really set up a space, and if it's smaller, you have really defined areas. And if you are getting older, like we all are, it's going to be probably a lot better for the knees, the back, and the overall aches and pains that you get as you get older. If you take anything from today, take the fact that you should not build your garden beds out of Douglas fir, because in a couple of years, you're going to be like me, regretting it. So take that with a grain of salt, but there are so many different ways that you can be building out raised garden beds. You can be doing steel, you can use things like cedar, a hardwood, you can be using concrete, you can be using your own organic materials, or you can try to do no-till gardening. We're still going to be sharing a lot of what it looks like to be doing some of our container raised bed gardens alongside a no-till garden. So if you're interested in learning about either or both of these, definitely comment down below what type of garden you're looking to get started, whether you're a veteran or a beginner, and we'll see you guys again next time.